Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie. I'm a full-time mixed media sketchbook artist, and today I'm going to be talking all about Tombow brush pens. So here is my mug of Tombows. These are all of the ones that I use the most. I do have a couple of others, but they're like a really bright red, a really bright yellow, and they're colours I just don't reach for. So today I'm going to be showing you these. I have them in a mug just because it's super handy to just grab and go. I have it on the little shelf on my desk and easy to grab for when I want to do some quick work in my sketchbook. So there are a few videos on my channel already where I use brush pens, but today I'm going to be swatching all of these because I want to share my full collection, and then I'll also show you how I use them at the end with some quick sketches. So some of these I have repurchased because I used them so much that they've run out, but I do find they last a really long time. As you can see, I definitely have a preference for more muted and natural colours. And there are a few brighter ones here, and there are some that I don't reach for all of the time, but some where I use them basically in every drawing I use with brush pens. But I'll talk you through that when I swatch, and I hope you find this helpful if you are building up your own collection of Tombow brush pens. I'm going to be swatching them in my Pith sketchbook, and we need a big double page spread so I can get all of the swatches on here for you. I'm going to do it on the left, and then I'll do some examples on the right. I'm not going to do them in any particular order, I'm just going to grab and swatch, and I will pop the numbers underneath as well. So if you've not seen Tombow brush pens before, I do have a video showing 3 ways to use them, but I've got a brush pen tip and then a thin nib here. And I don't use this end very often, but it is handy to have if you did want some finer details. I just prefer to use the thicker tip end just because I can get a bit more variation there. And I really like that they give a large amount of colour. So these are really pigmented. They're also water soluble, so you can water them down a little bit. You could do it on like a palette and then add some water, and that works really well. They do blend as well, though I tend to just use them as they are, but they are quite a versatile medium. This one is 553, this one I use all of the time. It's a really lovely bluey lilac. And I do have quite a few ones where I've bought individually. Some have come from packets, and obviously with buying multi-packs you're going to have some that you don't use as often, but sometimes it's really helpful because we don't always draw the same things all the time. Obviously I have a preference for nature illustrations, but sometimes I'll want to draw something that's super bright, or I'll need a red for a specific flower, and although I don't use red very often, it would be really helpful for that occasion. I find that there is a really good variety of range in the Tombows. So compared to the Ecolines, I've done a video comparing those brush pens if you want to see. I'll link that up in the cards, as well as anything else I mention. That'll be up in the cards and down in the description. But I find that there's a bit more of a wider range of colour with Tombows. The Ecolines are juicier and possibly easier to blend depending on your sketchbook. But I prefer a lot of the Tombow colours because there's a lot more muted colours. It feels like there's a bit more of a range in tone, and I definitely prefer more muted colours, so for me that's why I go for Tombows so often. 249 is a really nice dark green that I use a lot. This is also a really nice brown, 969. As you can see, I'm putting all the numbers here, so if there is a colour that you specifically like, then you can note down that colour. You can buy these from Colt Pens, Jackson's. I found that they're also really popular in the stationery community, so they're really widely available, which is really helpful. 126 is my favourite green. I use this one all of the time, and this one I've definitely bought a couple of because I have run out. But I also really like the 076, which is more of an olivey green. I definitely have the most greens. I think greens are my most used colour. I've also got a few beiges as well. I think that they're really versatile. This one is the 192. Again, a really lovely green. I use that one all the time. And then sometimes I do find that the lids don't necessarily match the colour, so that's something to be aware of. And not very helpful, but something just if you are using Tombows. And also here you can see that the nib was slightly dirty where I have used it before on a darker colour. So sometimes it's helpful to just sort of grab a piece of scrap paper first just to clean the nib, but it does clean off really well, so it's not really an issue. But obviously with lighter colours it's something to be aware of. But yes, as I was saying, it doesn't always match the colour of the lid. So it's also handy to do swatches like this if you do have them, just to see the colours. You can also put it on a scrap paper to test it out before you use it, or even put it on paper and then tape it to the barrel. Some of them are accurate, some of them are just a little bit off, especially for some of the brighter colours, and I found with some of the pinks and the purples, but the greens are quite accurate. This is a really dark turquoise, it's 346. Again, I don't generally reach for these brighter colours very often, but it's good to have in your collection. I would say that building up your collection slowly is helpful for you to know which colours, but I also know that they do sets, and that can be helpful if you do think you're going to use most of them. I usually say stay away from multi-packs just because you'll end up with some colours you don't use, but it does depend on what you draw and the pack that you get. I did find it helpful to build up my collection quickly, but again, if you're not going to use it, then there's no point. This one's N60, that's a really nice grey. That's quite a recent one to my collection. So I haven't got all of the colours, there's a lot that I don't have, but I've really enjoyed building up my collection over the years. This one looks like it would be in mustard, but it's definitely a lot more orange toned than it looks. I think if it was more yellow leaning, then I'd use it a bit more. I don't feel like there's anything missing in my collection. I could probably do with a few more greys and blues, but I don't feel like there's anything that's glaringly obvious that's missing in my colour palette, especially because I pair these with other mediums usually. I most of the time will add coloured pencil on top, and you'll see when I do my examples that I will do that a little bit later on. But I'm really happy with my collection. There are obviously ones that, like I said, I don't use all of the time. Oh, this is a good one. This one's $9.90. I do use this pretty often. That's a really nice neutral, and so is this one, which you can see is very, very well loved. This one is $9.42. This is probably my most used beige, but it's quite similar to the $9.90. So I'm not sure if I'll replace that one or just stick with that. Oh, I've written the same number. Or just stick with the $9.90 that I have. You can definitely pare this back. Obviously I have quite a lot here, but I would just like to point out that it's taken me a long time to build this up. I didn't buy them all in one go. This is many years worth of collecting. And I did also create some social media posts for Tombow last year, so some of these were sent to me for free as well. But I had these way before I started working with them, so I definitely recommend using them. If you haven't tried them before, I recommend just buying 4 or 5. In my Ultimate Art Supply video, I do list my top 5, but obviously it does depend on the subjects that you draw. And maybe there are some here that you really like the look of and would like to start or build on your collection. I would say there are some colours that are very, very similar. So, oh, this one's a really nice one. This one's 133. It's a really vibrant, luminous green, but I find pairing it with the 126 or the 177 pairs it back a little bit, and it's just a really nice, vibrant one. But yes, there are definitely some that are super similar, so you don't need a whole collection. This one's running out. This one's 451, which was my go-to light blue, but that one's since been replaced by this one, which is slightly different. This one's 491, and it's just a little bit more muted, but you wouldn't really know the difference, so you don't need the whole collection of Tombows, because for me you can have either or on ones like these, and the same with the beiges. So I'm just going to finish swatching these out. I'm not sure if I've done this in an equal way, but we'll see where we get to on the page. Here's an example where the colour doesn't match the lid, so it's a lot more orange toned than the lid looks. So just something to think about when you are using them. If you expect it to come out as the lid colour, it's very, very different. So I just have one duplicate here, which is the 126, which is my most used green. That's probably why I have 2. I also have a duplicate of the 553 because I use that one quite a lot. But as you can see, there are some brighter pops of colour, but mostly I've got a lot of neutrals and natural colours because of what I prefer to draw. And I'm going to talk you through and show you how I use them now on the next page whilst I draw some flowers. So I've just got some photos from my camera roll of some flowers, but you can find these from your own photos or from copyright-free image sites. And I'm just going to start with some basic colours. So I'm going to start from light to dark, and that's not always how I work. I just find that obviously you can't go over dark, so I like to get my base colours down. And if you've been on my channel before, you'll know that I don't often sketch first, and so I tend to put my shapes down with my brush pens and then I'll define it later on with coloured pencils. So I'm just grabbing out a few colours for this one. This is a really pretty white flower, and obviously I don't have a white, so I'll be using the white of the paper, but I do want to shade it a little bit, so I'll use maybe I'll use a lilac for that, and then we've got the yellow for the middle and then a bit of pink. So these are the colours I think I'll use, and like I said, I'll start with the lights. So I just use this to map in some of the shapes. So there's a few stems here, and then we've got the big flower here. So I'm going to work with the negative space a little bit for those petals, but I want to put in the yellow of the middle of the flower. And it's mostly just getting down the shapes here, so I am really simplifying the picture. And then I'll use my lilac to sort of start adding in some of these shadows. And I do want to use negative space for around it, so I'm just adjusting where these petals come out from. So you can get really fine lines without using the other end of the brush pen, so you can still use this end and get quite a lot of variation. So let me just show you down here. I can go thin and then thick, and I think that's why these are often favoured by brush letterers, because you can get a really wide variety of strokes and it feels really smooth. I don't tend to use that when I am drawing, but it's really helpful to just be able to be quite detailed with it and also put down big blocks of colour, which you'll see me do later. The other thing you can do is obviously create new colours. So where I've put down some of this yellow, I can put some green on top and it will create a slightly different shade of green. So it's quite surprising just how much you don't have to have every single colour to be able to create a wide variety of different shades. There's another flower up here, I'm just going to block that in. So I'll start with the centre of the flower and just add a bit of orange on top of that. So you can have a play around with layering different colours on top and creating totally different shades. That's a really fun way to use them. So I'm looking less at the reference here, I'm kind of just making it up a little bit. I tend to use the reference as a starting point, and then I can go off piece a little bit. I'm going to start blocking in some shapes, and I'm going to go around where these petals go, and I've got to remember, the hardest part is remembering where you can't go, so that's why sometimes the lines help, but I'm going to go over this in a minute with a darker colour. And the other thing to think about with this is it does create a lot of texture, and I know that can be really difficult at first because you might want a really smooth colour and you have to be really quick with your colouring if you don't want any of these lines to show, but I find that it's best to just embrace that. I find it's easier to embrace the texture rather than try and fight against it. It does depend on your paper. This is sinking in quite quickly on the pith paper, but if you don't want that texture then you probably need marker paper. But for me, I enjoy just sort of going with that texture, and although it's looking a little bit sloppy at the moment, we're going to neaten that up. So I'm going to start coming in with my other greens now, because at the moment this is just a big block of that lighter green and I want to add some variation. So I also really enjoy using them to their side, and that loosens my control, so I can be a bit more organic with my mark making. And then I'm going to come in with the darker green, and I want to again really define some of these petal shapes, but I want to suggest that there's some more stalks in the distance. and they layer really nicely. I find that they don't go through the other side. Obviously, if I was rubbing really hard and doing many layers, I think it would come through the paper. When I'm using my Royal Talons, I'm just a little bit aware of that. I find that a few layers it doesn't hurt and it doesn't come through, but it does depend on the sketchbook that you're using. So I'm not filling it in completely. You can still see a little bit of the green coming through underneath, so the lighter green. I really like the way that that looks. It just adds a bit more energy by keeping squibbly little marks, and it just makes it really nice and fresh. And you can see by adding in that dark contrast, it's really changing the way that this one feels, and I'm liking how it's turning out. Now I am obviously being a little bit more slapdash with it. You can definitely be neater, but for me I prefer a looser look in my artwork. I'm just going to continue filling in some more dark green, and then we'll come in with a little hint of pink and then some colour pencils. Okay, so that is my darkest colour blocked in. Now I'm just going to come in with a little bit of pink. Just add that around the middle. And then I'm going to come in with my coloured pencils. And I want to keep this still quite simple. So I'm just picking a few tones just to start putting in a few more little lines on my flowers. You can use the smaller tip of the Tombows for this part, but I really like the softness that this adds using the pencil texture. And then I'm going to come in with a dark green, and again just neaten up some of these. I don't think that's quite dark enough, so I might swap that for the dark indigo. And again I'm just going to darken on top, so it still leaves the base of the Tombow on the bottom, and so I'm not going to have to sharpen my coloured pencil quite as much as if I was just filling in with coloured pencil. So it's really nice to have that layer to work on top of, and that's generally how I prefer to use brush pens, is to use that as my base layer and then come in and refine things and add details with my coloured pencils. So I could have reduced the amount of colours that I used. I did use 7 overall, and I definitely could have done a more of a limited colour palette, maybe reduce some of the greens. But overall I really like this. It is quite messy and loose, but I think it came together quite nicely. Now I'm going to do another method with the brush pens over here in the corner. So for this one I'm going to grab out some more colours. I'm not going to do a dark background for this one, I'm just going to do a floral illustration. Again, I'm using some brighter pinks, and I'm going to be drawing a foxglove. So I'm not going to be focusing on negative space here, I'm just going to be putting down the main shapes that I can see. If I want to be looser again, I'll hold it by the barrel of the pen rather than holding it as you would a pencil. And again, I'm trying to be quite loose. This is generally how I work, but as I said, you can sketch first. I'm also going to change my pink a little bit as well. And I'll define it with my coloured pencils, which is how I work the most. This is generally how I'll use them. So I'm just going to fill this in. I really like using them because they put down nice blocks of colour. I've got an example on my Patreon where I've created full scenes and like landscapes with brush pens rather than floral illustrations like this, but it's similar in the way that I'm putting down the block colours and then I'll define them with coloured pencils. That's just my preferred method. So that's my foxglove, the Leaning Tower foxglove. And then I'm going to come in with some greens. Again, I'm going to pick 2 shades and I'm going to vary those. And I find that works for me because I think it gives a bit more variation and a little bit more interest. So rather than just using one green for all of it, I really like using slightly darker or different toned green. So I'll just come over here and add that on top. Actually, this one is running out, so let me swap that. Let's swap it for this one. So this one is more of a blue toned green than the one I've already put down. And then I can put in some shapes for the leaves. Again, it doesn't have to be accurate. I'm going to define this a little bit with my colour pencils. The pith paper I'm using, it really does sink in really quickly. So that's why you can see a lot of texture, and it's creating that sort of mottled effect, which I didn't like at first, and I'm sort of getting used to it. Let's add in some of that other green as well, just layering it on top. So you can see it does create a slightly different green, obviously because I'm putting it on top of the green that I've already put down. So that creates a nice variation too. Okay, so that's generally how I put down my base with the brush pens, and now I'm going to neaten everything up with my coloured pencils. So I'm going to pick a dark tone here, and that's so that I can work on top of the colours I've already put down and start adding in a few more details. I find that I can be more careful with the coloured pencils because it makes it look a little bit more intentional, whereas if I went scribbly again straight away on top, like I did with the other one, it obviously creates a bit more of a looser image, and I want this one to be a little bit neater and more defined. So I'm just going to outline some of the marks, and if the outline isn't accurate, then I can either fix it with my coloured pencil line or just work with the shape that I've got. I'm also going to come in with a green just to add in some of the tops of these flowers where I haven't with the brush pens. And I'm not too worried if I go outside of where I've put down my colour. So when sometimes there's a bit of white showing through, I think that's quite nice. I think that adds a bit of interest to the illustration. And I'm not looking at my reference as much anymore, I'm just using the shapes I've got down. And again, that helps keep things nice and loose. It's not always super accurate, but I do find that it makes things a bit more interesting. And I just use the reference as my base, as my starting point, and then I can come in with my coloured pencils. I'm also going to come in with a darker one just to define these. So I'm going to outline. So I didn't do that in the first one, but I'm doing that here. And again, I've done this quite a lot in my sketchbook, and I really like the effect. So I'm just going to finish off this page because there are a few blank spaces with a few more floral illustrations, just whilst I chat to you and round this video off. I definitely prefer the foxglove approach, which is what I'm doing for these other floral illustrations. I think it's a little bit neater, but it's still got that looseness. You can definitely see the difference with the texture from the top one, and I think the outlines with the bottom one with the foxglove works a little bit better for my style, but it totally depends on your style and how you want to use them. As I said, I do have a video up on my channel already where I share 3 totally different ways to use Tombows, including blending them and with water, so I'll link that in the description and in the cards. But I hope you found this video helpful if you want to use brush pens more, or maybe build your collection or start from scratch. I hope it's helped to see all of the swatches and all of the colours that I use the most, and I hope you've enjoyed watching. A big thank you to my patrons for their support in allowing me to create these free videos here on YouTube, and a big thank you to you for watching. I hope you have a creative week ahead, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!